Have you ever wondered about the hidden stories the Bible holds? Stories that could reshape our understanding of history. Imagine uncovering a biblical narrative that reveals the origins of black people, connecting ancient scriptures to the rich heritage of African nations. It's a mystery that challenges conventional beliefs and invites you to see the scriptures in a new light. Dive into the intriguing tales of Ham and Kush in the Bible, and explore how these figures play a pivotal role in the biblical origin of African nations. This journey isn't just about the past. It's about unlocking insights that could change how you view the world today. Have you ever pondered how the Bible weaves the story of humanity's diverse ethnicities? It's like opening a treasure chest of ancient wisdom, revealing how different peoples and nations came to be. The Bible isn't just a spiritual guide. It's also a historical record that touches on the origin of black people in the Bible, among others. By exploring these narratives, one uncovers fascinating insights into the biblical origin of African nations. Now, imagine sitting down with a good friend and diving into these ancient texts. The stories aren't just old tales. They're living narratives that have shaped cultures for millennia. The mention of Ham and Kush in the Bible isn't just a footnote. It's a doorway to understanding how certain lineages are connected to Africa in the Bible. It's like piecing together a grand puzzle, where each piece reveals a bit more of the big picture. Let's consider the practical side. If you're curious, why not delve into some of these stories yourself? Books like The Curse of Ham, Race and Slavery in Early Judaism, Christianity, and Islam by David M. Goldenberg offer deep dives into these topics. It's not just about reading. It's about experiencing the richness of biblical history and seeing how Ethiopia in the Bible and Egypt play significant roles in these narratives. What's truly intriguing is how these ancient stories still resonate today. They offer perspectives on race and ethnicity in the Bible that can spark meaningful conversations. Think about how the story of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, has been interpreted over the centuries. It's not just a tale. It's a lens through which we can examine race in biblical context and perhaps gain a deeper understanding of our own world. As we journey through these scriptures, consider how these insights might influence your perspective. Maybe it's time to revisit those old stories with fresh eyes, seeing the connections and mysteries that were always there, waiting to be discovered. Ever wondered about the significance of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, in the grand narrative of biblical history? These three brothers are said to be the fathers of all nations, each spreading out to form different peoples across the world. According to the Bible, after the Great Flood, it was through them that humanity was repopulated. The narratives surrounding them have been used to explain the diversity of races and ethnicities we see today, especially linking black people to Ham's descendants. Ham, one of Noah's sons, is often associated with regions of Africa in the Bible. His lineage includes notable figures like Kush in the Bible, who is considered the ancestor of nations on the African continent. The story of Kush and Ham has intrigued scholars and believers alike as it delves into the roots of ancient civilizations in the Bible. These connections have been drawn to explain the presence of Ethiopia and other African nations mentioned in the scriptures. The descendants of Ham, including Kush, Mizraim, Egypt, Put, and Canaan, are frequently linked to the spread of civilizations in Africa and parts of the Middle East. This lineage has been a focal point in discussions about black people in biblical history. The Bible stories about race often highlight these connections, offering a lens through which to view the origins of different ethnicities according to Scripture. It's fascinating to see how these ancient narratives intertwine with the historical development of nations. However, it's important to approach these interpretations with care. Throughout history, some have misused these stories to justify racial divisions or promote harmful ideas. By re-examining the biblical interpretation of ethnicity, we can better understand the true message within these texts. The focus should be on unity and the shared heritage of all humanity, rather than divisions based on race or ethnicity in the Bible. As we delve deeper into these stories, consider how they resonate with modern perspectives on race in biblical context. What lessons can we glean about our shared history and the interconnectedness of all people? Exploring the lineage of Ham and the significance of Kush opens a door to understanding not just the past, but also how we view each other today. Have you ever looked into the genealogies in the Bible? They're like family trees connecting us all back to ancient times. The lineage of Ham is particularly interesting, especially when we see how his descendants are connected to Africa. Ham's descendants, as mentioned in the Bible, include notable figures like Kush, Mizraim, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. These names aren't just old words on a page, they represent the roots of African nations in the Bible. Take Kush, for example. Kush in the Bible is often associated with regions south of Egypt, encompassing areas we now recognize as Ethiopia and Sudan. This connection isn't just a random fact, it shows the presence of black people in biblical history. The stories of these descendants offer a glimpse into the biblical origin of African nations, showing how connected our histories truly are. Looking at Mizraim, he's linked to Egypt, one of the most important ancient civilizations in the Bible. Egypt's role in biblical stories shows how much Africa was part of the bigger picture. It's amazing to think that when we read about Egypt, we're also reading about the heritage of Ham's descendants. This connection adds depth to our understanding of how Africa and the Bible are closely tied together. Now, let's talk about Put and Canaan. Put is connected with North Africa, while Canaan holds a key place in biblical stories. By looking into these names, we begin to see how the lineage of Ham and the nations of Africa fit into the Bible's bigger story. It's like finding hidden pieces of a puzzle that show how everything connects. Isn't it amazing how these old lineages can still speak to us today? They remind us that the Bible isn't just spiritual teaching. It's also a historical document showing the movements and development of peoples. There's much to learn from Ham's descendants and their connection to African nations. Have you ever been curious about who Kush was in the Bible? Kush is an important figure when it comes to the biblical origin of African nations. As the son of Ham and the grandson of Noah, Kush holds a significant place in the family tree that traces the spread of people after the flood. His name is often linked with regions south of Egypt, which many scholars associate with ancient Ethiopia. This connection highlights Africa in the Bible in a clear and important way. Kush's descendants are believed to have established some of the earliest civilizations in Africa, such as the kingdoms of Nubia and Kush. These civilizations are mentioned in the Bible and played big roles in history. The ancient civilizations in the Bible that came from Kush's family helped shape culture and society at the time. This shows just how significant black people were in biblical history. When we read about Kush, we see how his story connects with other important events and people. The prophet Isaiah talks about Kush and the lands connected to him, showing their importance. This helps us understand how Ethiopia in the Bible isn't just a location, but a place with deep historical roots. Kush's story gives us a better understanding of how biblical references to Ethiopia and Africa fit into the bigger picture. If you're interested, you might want to explore more by reading historical books or visiting museums with exhibits on Egypt and Nubia. Seeing these places and artifacts can make these ancient stories feel more real. The ancient civilizations in the Bible weren't just stories. They were powerful nations that influenced history. As we reflect on Kush's story, we see how his legacy connects us to a rich and diverse history. His story reminds us that the Bible is not just about spiritual matters, but also about different cultures and peoples coming together. Have you ever noticed how often Ethiopia and Africa are mentioned in the Bible? These aren't just passing references, they're part of many important stories. The biblical references to Ethiopia and Africa show that these regions played key roles in ancient times. For example, the Book of Psalms talks about Ethiopia reaching out to God, showing a deep connection between these lands and God's purpose. This shows how Africa in the Bible isn't just a background but a central part of many events. One of the most well-known stories is about the Queen of Sheba. She traveled from what many think was Ethiopia to meet King Solomon, bringing riches and wisdom. This story shows the strong connection between Israel and African nations. It's another example of how African nations in the Bible were important, giving us a deeper understanding of history. In the book of Acts, we read about the Ethiopian eunuch who was baptized by Philip, a key moment in the spread of Christianity into Africa. This story highlights how black people in biblical history were involved in the early growth of the church. It shows that race and ethnicity were part of the Bible's stories, though maybe not in the ways we think of them today. If this has you curious, why not read these passages again with fresh eyes? When we understand the context of these references, it opens up new meanings and connections. Looking at how Ethiopia and other African nations fit into the Bible helps us see the bigger picture of race and ethnicity in the Bible. By reflecting on these biblical mentions of Africa, we can see the Bible's message of unity and how it includes all nations. These stories encourage us to appreciate the variety of people and cultures God created. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to walk through the ancient lands of Egypt and Kush? These places weren't just far-off lands, they were powerful civilizations with deep connections to the biblical world. Egypt is featured in many important biblical stories and was a dominant force in the ancient world. The story of Joseph and Moses are just two examples of how Egypt played a major role in the Bible. Moving south from Egypt, we find Kush, a kingdom in what is today Sudan. Though less known, Kush was also mentioned in the Bible and had great influence. Kush's wealth, power, and culture made it an important player in the biblical world. These ancient civilizations in the Bible remind us how much Africa contributed to the unfolding of history in the Bible. If you're interested in learning more, there are many books and documentaries on these great civilizations. Visiting a museum with exhibits on Egyptian or Nubian history can make these biblical stories come to life. When we read about Egypt and Kush, we aren't just learning about nations far away. We're connecting to the biblical origin of African nations that helped shape our world. The relationship between Egypt and Kush shows how interconnected the ancient world was. These nations traded, fought, and influenced one another, making their mark on history. Their stories show that race and ethnicity in the Bible were complex and multifaceted, and the Bible's message is one of connection across nations. Reflecting on Egypt and Kush reminds us of the depth of African history in the Bible. Their legacies continue to inspire us, showing the strength and significance of these great nations in both biblical and world history. Have you ever heard someone use the Bible to justify racial divisions? It's unfortunate, but throughout history, some have twisted Scripture to promote their own agendas. Misinterpretations of stories like those of Ham and Kush have been wrongly used to suggest that certain races are cursed or inferior. These misunderstandings have fueled prejudices and have been a stumbling block in recognizing the unity of all people as depicted in the Bible. It's important to revisit these texts to uncover the true meanings and dispel harmful myths. One common misconception is the so-called curse of Ham, which has been misused to justify the oppression of black people. In reality, the curse was placed on Canaan, Ham's son, not on Ham himself or his other descendants like Kush. This critical detail changes the narrative significantly. By correcting this misunderstanding, we challenge the erroneous beliefs that have persisted over centuries and promote a more accurate interpretation of biblical history. Another controversy revolves around the assumption that the Bible endorses racial hierarchies. However, when we delve deeper, we find that the scriptures advocate for love, equality, and justice among all people. Stories involving Ethiopia in the Bible, for instance, often highlight positive interactions and the inclusion of diverse nations in God's plan. Recognizing these examples helps us appreciate the Bible's messages about unity and the richness of different cultures. It's also worth noting how cultural and historical contexts have influenced interpretations. At times, translations and teachings have been colored by the biases of those in power. By studying the original languages and contexts, we can gain a clearer understanding of the scriptures. This approach helps us uncover the true essence of passages that have been misinterpreted and prevents the misuse of the Bible to justify discrimination. Reflecting on these misinterpretations and controversies encourages us to approach the Bible with humility and a desire for truth. It reminds us of the importance of critical thinking and the need to question long-held assumptions. By doing so, we open the door to a more inclusive and accurate understanding of biblical teachings. Have you ever thought about how the Bible talks about race and ethnicity? Even though the Bible doesn't use modern words like race, it clearly shows how different peoples and nations played a role in God's plan. The Bible talks about how all humans come from the same ancestors, which reminds us that we're all connected. This idea encourages us to look past differences and see the things that unite us. In the Bible, we read stories of different nations interacting with each other. The stories of Israel, with places like Egypt and Kush, show that different ethnic groups were part of God's bigger plan. The Bible recognizes that people from various backgrounds are all part of the story, including Ham's descendants. By reading these stories, we learn more about how people viewed identity in biblical times. The Bible also teaches that everyone should be treated with kindness and fairness, no matter where they come from. Verses about being kind to strangers and treating everyone equally remind us that God values each person. This message still matters today, as we live in a world full of different cultures and people. The Bible's message of love and respect for all people is timeless. The New Testament makes this message even clearer. Jesus and the apostles talk about how all nations are included in God's plan, breaking down barriers between people. One important story is the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts, which shows how early Christianity spread to Africa. This shows that faith is something that goes beyond race and ethnicity, uniting everyone under God. As we think about race and ethnicity in the Bible, we see that the Bible gives us a foundation for valuing diversity while recognizing our common humanity. These teachings encourage us to live in ways that celebrate our differences and bring us closer together. Have you ever marveled at how many different kinds of people there are around the world? The Bible tells us that God created all of these different people on purpose, and that everyone has a special role in His plan. This diversity is part of God's design, not something to be ignored or pushed aside. The Bible talks about how all nations and peoples are part of God's plan, showing us the beauty of unity and diversity. It's like a big picture made up of many unique pieces, each one important. The Bible is full of stories about different nations working together or coming into contact with one another. The New Testament, for example, talks about how Gentiles, non-Jews, were included in God's plan through Jesus. This teaches us that God values all people, no matter where they come from. It's a message that challenges us to see the good in people who might seem different from us. In our own lives, this idea of unity and diversity encourages us to learn from and engage with people who have different backgrounds. Maybe we can attend cultural festivals or read books from different traditions. By doing this, we not only learn more about others, but we also learn more about ourselves. This makes our lives richer and more connected to God's vision for humanity. The idea of unity also asks us to create communities where everyone feels included. We can do this in small ways, by being kind and open to people from different walks of life. By doing this, we help build bridges instead of walls. When we remember that each person is made in God's image, it changes how we interact with others and helps create a more peaceful world. As we think about unity and diversity in God's creation, it challenges us to live out these ideas every day. It's an opportunity to step outside our comfort zones and appreciate the wide variety of people and cultures God has made. There's joy in discovering that, despite our differences, we are all connected by God's love. As we wrap up this fascinating exploration of the origin of Black people according to the Bible, think about how these insights resonate with your own understanding. Have these stories of Ham and Kush shed new light on the connections between Africa in the Bible and our shared human heritage? Perhaps you're inspired to delve deeper into these Bible mysteries explained, uncovering truths that have been hidden in plain sight. What steps will you take to continue this journey of discovery? Maybe it's time to revisit the scriptures or explore historical texts that expand on these narratives. If you're eager to learn more and challenge your perspectives, make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Together, let's continue unraveling these intriguing mysteries and enriching our understanding of the world.